tell me about where you are at the moment in terms of like the orgy has launched. Miss Monday just gone, wasn't it the 7th?
Yeah.
And yeah, what would you like to sort of do with it? What are you hoping to do with it? And can I help?
Well, yeah, so we released it online this week on Short of the Week, and it's also going to be coming out in a week or two on Director's Notes as well. And yeah, it's really, I suppose this is like the culmination of, we actually filmed it a couple of years ago, and much like your own short film, you know, the post-production process took a while because we were relying on a lot of favors and a lot of, you know, of hustling to get it done. But then once it was finished, we had a really nice time kind of taking it around to film festivals and that kind of thing, which again, much like what you're doing here online, it's another way of connecting with filmmakers and making new friends and potential collaborators and all that kind of thing. So that's been great. And yeah, and then and also off the back of it, we had some interest from some TV companies, and we've partnered with a TV production company to develop a possible TV adaptation of the short film. It's really exciting. Yeah, so that's kind of ongoing, and you know, who the hell knows if it will ever actually come to life, but it's certainly been, you know, a huge amount of fun doing that and breathing, you know, more life into the characters. And I'm sure you probably feel the same way with your own films, but you know, you make the 10-minute or the 15-minute thing because that's what you've got the resources that you can muster to make. But of course, you've got a million other ideas for where things can go and all of that. So that's been really fun to continue to sort of play around in that world and with these characters, and hopefully that will come to screens at some point. But you know, also it's just been great kind of putting the short film out there and kind of hearing back from people who actually watch it, because you know, as I'm sure you've experienced as well, it's like, you know, you make something kind of in isolation with just a few key collaborators, and you nurture it, you know, and give it all your sort of love and attention, and you put it out into the world, and there's a part of you that's always terrified that the world will go, what? You think that's good? That's a terrible thing, you know?
Yeah, what were you thinking? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that doesn't work.
And so it's been really nice to kind of, yeah, what were you thinking? So it's been nice to kind of to hear back from people who've watched it, and just particularly getting messages from people who I, you know, don't even know, but you know, who've somehow, you know, through my website or whatever sent me a message. And it's just so, you know, in a way that's the whole point of doing this, I think, whether it's online or whether it's in person at festivals or whatever, is to sort of, it's almost like, I think of it as being like, you know, a creative magnet where you can find other sort of weirdos like you in the world who, you know, you can kind of make those connections that hopefully, you know, help a creative life to blossom and all that. So yeah, that's kind of been what this week's been all about with the release, and what a lot of the last couple of years of showing it around the world has been like as well, you know.
Sure. And you know, I'd love to add it to the film dimension and promote it as much as we can, you know, along with this interview. And yeah, get people watching. I mean, how did the idea for this particular project start? And do you want to like briefly talk about how you got into making films in the first place? As in, that is it how many other short films projects you worked on before this?
Sure. Well, so I, you know, I was a kind of a fairly sort of, I don't know, slightly kind of bored, lonely teenager who, you know, discovered making films with friends on the weekend as a way to, I don't know, fill our time. And so I've been doing it for a very long time, but you know, when I was young, I would just make things that didn't really have a script, didn't really have, you know, necessarily a good idea. It was mostly just, well, we've got a certain number of hours to kill, let's just film something and see what happens. And some of them turned out to be junk, and some of them turned out to be surprisingly something. And then you go, oh, okay. And then, you know, at a certain point you kind of realize like, oh, if we maybe talk about what we're going to do beforehand, you know, they tend to go a bit better, or if someone's got a good idea, it tends to go a bit better. And so I just did that a lot when I was young, which I look back now and I'm like, how did I have the kind of wherewithal to do that? But I guess, I don't know, it was youthful naivety or something to think that was a thing. But it was really fun, and I would put them online. This was initially in the days before YouTube. There wasn't really any kind of platform to upload things, but I remember, I don't know if you remember GeoCities, but GeoCities was a web hosting platform, and they used to give you 15 megabytes of free upload. And so I would create like a new GeoCities site for every film that we made, and I would link them all together in this kind of spider's web of free sites. And anyway, so that was kind of fun, and people used to send me like abusive messages in the early days of the internet being like, you should die. But then YouTube came along, and I carried on doing that. And then weirdly, I had a few things that sort of went not viral, but like what felt like viral for a young teenager who was putting stuff on the internet. Suddenly, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people watching something, and it's like, whoa, this is crazy. So then I was like, oh, maybe I should really like properly do more of this. And so and so I just kind of carried on and never really stopped. And I didn't go to film school or anything like that, but I did just carry on making films. And then at a certain point in my early 20s, I decided to try and get into the film industry properly to see if I could kind of learn a bit more like how films are actually made. So that's obviously a pretty torturous thing to do in the early years, and there's a lot of like luckily now I think the industry is changing, but there was definitely a lot of just like working for free for people who behaved quite badly and weren't very nice and so on. But I did meet a couple of real like wonderful people, including I ended up working as an assistant at Ealing Studios for a while, and there was a woman there called Sophie Meyer who was my boss. She was the head of development at Ealing Studios, and she really took me under her wing. And I'd been writing a feature film script that I sort of had, again, some brazen ambition to think that I could get made, and I showed it to her when I was her assistant, and she read it, and she kind of nurtured it, and she read 3 drafts and gave me notes, and then at a certain point said, I think this is ready, and she helped me get an agent with that script and that kind of thing. So I owe a huge debt of gratitude to her, and I always tell her that whenever I see her, and she's I think she's bored of hearing me say thank you now. But so yeah, but then I kind of I was working in the film industry for a few years, and I sort of that almost took over, and I stopped making shorts for a few years because I was just like busy doing that. And then I was like, no, come on, you're a filmmaker, like you're the guy who makes films, like make films. So I did a Kickstarter for a film in 2014, which required sort of a lot of work to get that Kickstarter money raised, and that was quite challenging and took it out of me for a while. But then I wanted to do The Orgy as like a kind of, I suppose, a sort of a final like calling card film or something that that would bring together everything that I had learned doing all of these other kind of no budget things. And I would always see people making films with like known actors in them, and this kind of thing, and I was like, why don't I get known actors in my films? And I was like, because I never ask any known actors to be in my films. So I decided to just be bold. And anyway, so I have a very good friend called Tilly who produced the film, and she had been working as an assistant and then as an executive at Working Title Films. And so she had a relationship with the casting director there called Lauren Evans, who's a wonderful person and now a friend. And so when Tilly and I had been talking about doing a short film together at the same time, and so then when I came up with the idea for The Orgy and wrote a script, I sent it to Tilly, and she wanted to do it. And then she sent it to Lauren, the casting director, who luckily also wanted to come on board and help us for free, which, again, I'm be forever grateful to her for. And so with basically Tilly and Lauren's help, we were able to get all of these amazing cast members to come on board. And, at that point, it was like, oh, wow, we need to really, do right by these people and do a good job. So yeah, we kind of pulled in every favor we possibly could between Tilly and I from our different years of working in the industry. Luckily we knew a fair number of people by that point. So we were able to get like all of our post-production was donated for free. And, we got amazing deals on like camera and lighting and all that kind of thing. So it was really like, I have such a sort of fond place in my heart for everyone involved in the orgy, because and that's my favorite as well when I watch the film, is I just see all of the different elements that these different people brought to it that never could have happened without all of this generosity of people around us. So yeah, that's kind of I suppose how it came to be.
Sure. So a bit of luck, quite a lot of persistence, and favors. And again, that's kind of the thing, isn't it? It's like you could say, oh, well, we ask a lot of favors from people that we knew, but that in itself is a skill, isn't it? The fact that making those connections with the idea that in like 2 years' time, I'm possibly going to ask you a big favor.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, definitely. And I remember when I was first kind of getting into the film industry in London, I used to go to these like networking events, and I would hate them because I was like, this feels so kind of Machiavellian and transactional to try and just, get someone who can be in your network or whatever. And so I would always, stand in the corner with a couple of other weirdos, and we'd like, sort of look out at people furtively and go, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here either. And then those people, we'd end up sneaking off early and going for a drink or going for dinner or something. And then sure enough, those people become your network. And it's like, oh shit, the networking event worked, entirely for purpose. And it's just, we didn't think we were networking with each other. I thought I was just making friends with other people who didn't want to be there, but it was exactly, what it was setting out to do. So I always tell people that, because people often say like, oh, I don't know how to network or whatever. And I always think like, well, then find other people who don't like networking. Like networking really just means finding people who you like, who you would want to be friends with, even if you get nothing from them in return. And then sure enough, you end up like talking about, oh, I secretly feel that way about the world as well. Oh, cool. Maybe we'll make a film about that,
if you're all trying to make films, then why wouldn't you help each other out?
Exactly.
If you kind of are friends and get along. It makes sense. So did you do the sort of film competition route, film festival route with the orgy, as in has it gone through that sort of stages, and that's now why it's online? And how did you find that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we did. That was another thing, I think, was that I had, with the earlier short films I'd made, I'd never really made a sort of concerted effort to really push it at film festivals. I would sort of randomly throw it at a few festivals, but not really, do much about it. And that was, again, the influence of Tilly, the producer, who, she was like, no, we've made this amazing thing. Let's, we've made this amazing thing. We were really happy with it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Like, let's really kind of give it its best shot to find an audience and tour the world a bit. So we made sure to keep some money aside in the budget that would be specifically for festival submissions. And I mean, God, they're so expensive. Like, I can't remember exactly how much it was, but I think it was probably like, pushing $1,000 on festival submissions ultimately. So that's no small amount. And but we did that, and it was great. We took it to most of the sort of major festivals in the UK, not London Film Festival, unfortunately, but we did take it to a number of the big ones, and then also took it around the world, and that was amazing. I went to Germany with the film. I went to America with the film. It played in Australia. It played in Norway. Like, it's sort of it's had a nice kind of international life as well, which is also fun. When I went to Germany with it, I was a bit sort of nervous as to whether like the Germans would like get the sense of humor or whatever, and they mostly did. But then there was one moment when I was sitting in the screening in this festival in Germany, and there's a bit in the film where he's in the sauna with Alex Roach's character, and she says, "Do you want a kiss?" And he says, "Oh," and he sort of freezes up, and kind of gets awkward and sort of ruins the moment. And this German guy behind me shouted out, "What's the problem?" And I was like, okay, wow, there's a slight disconnect in terms of awkwardness and boundaries or whatever. But broadly speaking, it was very well received around the world, and that was, again, just like really heartening. And also, to be honest, the best thing was just I made some friends again at these festivals who have gone on to be not only friends but also people who I share scripts with for notes, and we read each other's stuff and so on. So that's again the sort of the lovely outcome of making work that's personal and that you have put yourself into, is that other people watch it and go, oh, I vibe with that, so let's hang out. And then
I guess that's pre-COVID times,
yeah,
when festivals were still
exactly,
happening in real time.
I feel very, very lucky that we didn't enter in to the 2020 festival circuit.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think the festivals have done an amazing job at carrying that stuff on.
Sure, it's like everything else. You've got to evolve with it, and hopefully things will go back to the way they were before. Later this year and certainly next year, it will go back to meeting people, because you can't really beat actually being in a room with someone and getting to know them and making friends. Is there anything you're particularly working on now? I'm sure over the sort of COVID time you've had lots of ideas, as everyone does.
Yeah.
What are you sort of working towards at the moment?
I mean, yeah, that's definitely been, that's been one of the things. I mean, I definitely at the start of COVID, I was like, look, if all you achieve this year is just surviving this, global pandemic, that will be fine and so on. But I did ultimately end up sort of, I think, finding that it was bringing me kind of comfort to be working on things that I could look forward to in the aftermath of it. So I have spent a lot of time this year, writing basically. Writing. I've been developing 2 feature film projects. One of which is the original script I wrote way back when, that I mentioned earlier, which had been dormant for a few years, but I revisited it and I was like, oh, I actually love this, and I see some of the mistakes I'd made then that I could address now and take it into new layers and whatever now. So that one I'm really excited about, and that's a really personal story for me that's that I'm kind of very invested in. And the other one is a new feature film project, which is a sort of low-ish indie, low budget-ish kind of indie sort of romantic drama, I suppose. It is funny, but it's kind of a love story set over one night in Edinburgh, and that one I really deeply love and hope I get to make soon as well. And then TV stuff, so the Orgy series, and I've got 2 other TV projects that I'm developing, which I'm really excited by. And then and then also just more short films. So I made a short film during lockdown, which I made with some friends, and we put online earlier this year, and that was great fun to sort of have an excuse to see people in a professional context when we hadn't seen each other for a very long time. And and also just I think I've realized that I love short films, and that you don't have to sort of only kind of progress in a linear fashion up the sort of the length ladder of once you've made some shorts, then you've got to make a feature and you can't make any more shorts. I think I've realized, one of the things I've realized in the pandemic is I just love making stuff with people, and I love sort of translating whatever experiences I have and feelings I have into things that hopefully can connect with people and can be shared with the world. So I've kind of embarked on this this project at the moment, which is as we slowly begin to come out of lockdown and life begins to be more interactive and in person again, just sort of putting a few micro budget short film projects in my diary as things to look forward to in the year ahead, so that whatever happens with the features and whatever happens with TV stuff, because the reality is everything always takes 10 times longer than you think, and there's always rejections along the way and so on. It's very normal. But I really believe that it's so important if you're a filmmaker to make films and just keep making films, and whatever resources you have, whatever your limitations are. The thing we did in lockdown is just set in a living room, and I love that challenge of can we make something that's 10 minutes in a living room more interesting than if we had a huge budget for visual effects, and if we had 10 different locations and so on? Can we turn this limitation into a strength? And so I love challenges like that. So that's my big thing as well, is I'm hoping in the year to come to make a couple more short films just with friends and people I've met over the last few years, and for no reason other than just the love of making them, really, with no kind of
Sure.
agenda towards outcomes other than just making stuff.
Do you think, as I was having this conversation yesterday with another filmmaker, and we were talking about just how much content is being created at the moment in terms of how many films, be it short films, feature films, online films, streaming, all that sort of stuff, how much content is being created now as opposed to even like 5 years ago, but certainly like 10 years ago, and it's staggering the difference. It's like thousands more each year. Do you think, from a filmmaker's point of view, from your point of view, what have you just saying? You just been explaining about you've got some ideas for feature films and the short films and the traditional arc of progression. Do you find that filmmaking now in 2021 is evolving to that literally 1 minute you could be making a feature film, or you could be making a web series that's going to be a 6-part or 10-part that's purely streaming online, and the lines are blurred and you're just telling stories in different ways? Or do you think that there's always going to be this is a feature film and all of this is kind of the other noise? Where do you sort of stand on that?
Totally. I mean, that question touches on like 5 really interesting things. So many things to talk about there. But yeah, I think, first of all, I mean, when I was entering into the film industry, around 10 years ago, the prevailing, wisdom was a feature film is real and everything else is lesser. And I think, like I sort of was an assistant at companies and witnessing the emergence of streaming platforms and so on. And I remember very, clearly how swiftly it went from, oh, you don't want to, something to be a VOD release or whatever, to now where Netflix is the dream buyer for your film because they will probably pay for it outright rather than you having to cobble together 18 different sources of financing and so on. So, there has been a real sort of removal of any stigma attached to the streaming, world, which I think is great. You're 100% right that there is so much content being made now, and I think the argument can definitely be made that there is enough, no more. Let's just all stop making things and let's just watch what exists already. But then you see something like, I May Destroy You, or whatever, some amazing new piece of work. And especially from all these fantastic new and diverse voices that are coming out who've never had the opportunities to tell their own stories before, and it's like, oh my god, this is so exciting, and thank god that new stuff is being made all the time. And obviously, as someone who is from a relatively privileged background, and I'm a white man and so on, there's also a very strong argument for, Sam, stop making stuff, like take a step back. And I have really thought about that a lot during the pandemic, and ultimately, the position that I've currently sort of gravitated towards is to acknowledge and admit that I have a sickness and a disease, which is that I have to make things. And it doesn't sometimes matter if I'm just making like a birthday video for my friend that I can, text them on their birthday that makes them smile, or if I'm making the orgy, or if I'm trying to make a feature film, whatever. I have to make something every day to like placate the gods of, mental health and whatever. So sure. I think, I think that's basically what I've realized, and that I have to keep making stuff. And I think there's going to be a really interesting next 10 years that happens in terms of which platforms become the dominant forms of distribution, how, because it used to be that a movie, starring Will Smith or whatever opens and everyone goes to see it on Friday night. Now a movie starring Will Smith barely manages to break through the noise, and that's no reflection on Will Smith. That's just a reflection on the sheer amount of stuff there is. So, I think it's really important for everyone to understand that, maybe the expectations for how many people are going to be able to see your work, or what that distribution strategy can be and so on, it's not going to be exactly like it was 10 years ago and so on. So some people might look at that and think, oh, that's depressing or whatever. I look at that and I say, okay, that's even more reason than ever to make things that you genuinely and sincerely love, that you would do if, tell the stories that you would want to tell if no one was ever going to see them, and if you put them online and 12 people watch them and you're still okay with that because you had to make it and because you love that story and that was a story you needed to tell. So for me it's creatively emboldening because it just says be honest, be who you are, and don't chase any sort of outcomes in terms of distribution or whatever. Now that's not to say that you don't want to be your film to reach the widest possible audience and so on. Of course you do, but I think we are living in a time where everything is existing on an exponential growth curve, not just viruses, but social media noise and films being made, and everything is just going stratospheric in terms of just volume constantly all day every day. And when I look back at the films I made as like a 17-year-old that got hundreds of thousands of views or whatever on YouTube, those things would not be cutting through today, guaranteed, because it's just a different space that you're putting work out there into. So I think as a filmmaker, all you can do is say, what do I love? Can I trust that that is enough? Can I trust that if I make work that I really try as hard as I can to make good and make beautiful or funny or honest or whatever your agenda is, or thrilling, or whatever it might be, if you just do that and keep doing that, I believe that will, if nothing else, nourish the soul and hopefully connect you with other people who feel the same way. And websites like yours are wonderful for helping niche films find audiences and so on. But and if things progress beyond that and you get to break out in a big way, fantastic. But if not, keep creating.
I totally agree. And I in many respects I'm quite encouraged with, obviously, the evolution of technology enables people to make films easier on the phones, perhaps, and certainly in editing it and production and everything else. But it's as you touched upon and what you said, it's almost like, because there's so much content, no one, no matter if you've been in the industry for 20 years, or you're a brand new filmmaker that's got an idea and it's really, really different. You can't, no one, especially the bigger people, the people with all the money behind them, they can't afford to be blasé with their stories. They can't afford to do safe generic themes anymore. They almost have to go, right, is this film different because it's got to compete, even if it's got 100 million pounds behind it and they're tracking loads of money at it. That doesn't necessarily mean, as I said, lots of people are going to see it, because the breakaway hit, the underground burner, whatever it is, on a platform that could literally get 1 million people or 10 million people watching it, just because it's so damn good and never been seen before, can compete with the next Star Wars film. So I think that literally the idea of diversity, which obviously has been very prevalent the last few years, about more people telling different stories from their different backgrounds, which is all great. But every single person needs to basically think, right, okay, is the story that I'm about to tell just a bit rubbish? Is it a little bit too boring? And what am I, as you say, like a straight white male sort of thing, making a film, and you say, well, what are all these other voices? Okay, fair enough. But of course, that doesn't stop you or I going, right, I've got this idea for a film, and maybe in my head, the two characters were like a man and a woman, and they were like in their 30s, and they were both white and English. Well, they could actually also be African, or they could be from China living in England, and they could be, one of them could be disabled.
Absolutely, but also, even going further than that, I mean, I think, what I've been really inspired by the sort of new generation of filmmakers, who are emerging in their 20s, and the more like diverse voices that we've had coming through in recent years, which is like a lot of the stuff that I've really loved in recent years, I think has also kind of emboldened me to say, okay, well, maybe, I thought that, I didn't have anything to say, but actually when I think about being, a young man in the 90s growing up in sort of lad culture, what did that do to my brain? What did that notches on the bedpost sort of attitude teach me as a young person growing up? That's on display in The Orgy through the Dustin Demery Burns' character Gary, and that's, you know, the sort of the war between these two characters, you know, of Amit Shah's character wanting to be a good guy and, you know, sort of going above and beyond to try and stay within the rules and suffering for it, and Dustin's character Gary, you know, trying to sort of, you know, walking through life with a swagger as if he belongs there and owns the place and seemingly getting away with it, and, you know, but being kind of the, you know, the villainous joke of the film in some ways. I mean, I love the character, but like, you know, the film is kind of saying neither one of these approaches is quite right, and actually there's an important conversation to be had, you know, amongst people who, you know, look and talk like me about, you know, how, you know, what is our role in society, you know, how do we treat women, how do we treat people of color, how do we treat people of different abilities, and so on, you know, so that, you know, we're not continuing and propagating, you know, systemic inequalities and so on. So, you know, I'm trying to look, you know, I think I went through a period of time in the last few years where I was taking that approach that you mentioned of like, okay, can I, you know, make this character who might have been written, you know, in my head as white, can I cast diversely and so on, and that's all well and good, and it should be done as well. But I think what I'm also trying to do now is to say, can I look within myself and be scathing about some of the things that I've learned and internalized? And can I put on screen? And, you know, that's a lot of the stuff I'm trying to do in my work now. My next few projects is saying like, okay, I recognize certain patterns of behavior in myself and in people like me that I think need to be like examined in a sort of somewhat devastating light, and really, you know, shown to be flawed, so that we can all as a culture talk about those things and move on. And there's amazing work being done by people in, you know, all areas of society, not just by people who look and speak like me, you know, about the you know, flawed behavioral patterns of you know, privileged white guys and so on. But I think as someone who's, you know, in the body of that archetype, I can say, well, I've been alive for 33 years and I've witnessed what it's like to be both the beneficiary, you know, and recipient of that privilege, but also what does that do to an internal mental health state, and what, you know, what patterns of behavior have I been exhibiting that are learned but that actually don't make me feel good, or that I've witnessed the consequences of, and so on, and how am I trying to change? So I think, you know, there's a real opportunity for everyone, if they're honest enough and if they're specific enough about their own experiences of what it is to be alive, you know, to contribute positively and constructively to the conversation, and to do it in a way that can be funny, or, you know, hopeful, or scary, or thrilling, or whatever, you know.
But I mean, that's an interesting point. Again, I've heard this talked about from comedians, you know, stand-up comedians, fairly recently in various different podcasts and things. And it's almost like the idea of there isn't many really funny films being made. When I say that, as you know, from mainstream, I'm sure there's tons of short funny films out there and independent ones, but, you know, stuff that was getting a cinematic release up until very, very recently. But, you know, the ones that have got big name stars and big budget, things like, I'm trying to think of the last really funny film. And it's almost because I think a lot of people are a little bit too scared to be funny in terms of confrontational funny or combative funny, like comedians would be, but in a film, because they're like, oh, we can't, yeah, be too sort of risky because we're going to offend someone. We can't. And then again, it all becomes very, very middle of the road and vanilla.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very aware that, you know, we're obviously two sort of white guys talking about this stuff, and I don't want to presume to have all of the answers. So I'm sure I've, you know, neglected to mention certain things. But to your point, I mean, I agree with you that there's been a lack of, you know, really funny films in the last few years. I mean, I think part of it is just you know, an economic shift that's happened, which is that 10 plus years ago, there used to be a lot of movies being made in the like 10, 20, 30, $40 million range. And just like in the housing market, and just like in, you know, the you know, employment market and so on, like the middle has gotten sort of squeezed, and now basically films are the equivalent of like the Uber driver gig economy, where it's like, can you make something for 50p, or it's the Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos films of can you make something for $250 million? And like that middle class or middle ground of films, just don't get made in the same way anymore. And that's really sad, because those are the films, that I grew up loving. I mean, James L. Brooks and, whatever. There's so many wonderful films that just, but those stories are now being told on television a lot of the time now. And I mean, you look at something like I May Destroy You or Fleabag or, whatever, which in a slightly, larger canvas of television. And yes, it might not have, major movie stars in it, but it's breaking people who are, new and exciting. But yeah, I mean, it is also, it's been a scary few years. I mean, I think it's hard to joke sometimes when you're in the middle of, kind of a traumatic experience, and also be in a time that appears to be like, beyond satire. I mean, that's also, I think, part of that kind of exponential growth curve is like, how do you make comedy when the news moves so fast and when the cultural conversations are racing so fast? How do you write a film that, can come out in 18 months or 2 years? Or, I think the average British feature film takes 8 years from conception to cinematic release. So, how do you kind of...
That would be crazy, wouldn't it? If a film that came out next month was conceived 8 years ago.
And so what I think is going to happen is we're going to see a lot of like escapist and uplifting stuff after the pandemic that that's trying sort of almost to not talk about anything that's been going on. I mean, I don't know about you, but personally, like, I really don't want to see any movies that are like, the premise is like, and they're stuck in lockdown together, and I think everyone has been through a real hammer to the head of a year, and we want to sort of get out of that, basically. But I think comedy always thrives when there is sort of tension in the air, and things that are sort of that have some friction to them. And I think just because certain comic voices from 30 years ago or comic attitudes from 30 years ago may not kind of land in the same way now, there is also new comedy coming through that is going to be amazing, and and I'm excited by that. And I see the stuff that is being done like on TikTok, and by the people who are like the age I was when I started making films. I'm going, oh my god, like, wait until these people are running their own TV shows and everything. It's going to be a whole different kind of world, and that's exciting to me, because I just love seeing new stuff.
And again, technology is often the cause of it, but also can be the forefront of it. So I was going to say, like, where do you see yourself in sort of the next 5 years in terms of getting your feature films, TV work? But we've kind of covered that in many respects. So I'd say, if you could go back and meet your sort of teenage self when you just started making film stuff, what would you tell yourself? What advice would you give yourself?
I think I'd give myself 2 pieces of advice simultaneously. One would be, greenlight yourself, don't wait for permission, make stuff, keep making stuff. If you're a filmmaker, make films. And I was doing that sometimes, but it was, it sort of went up and down at different times. But I think that's like so important. But on the other side of things, I would say it takes 10 times longer than you think it will. Like that, you always think you're ready. You always think, come on, no one's giving me the opportunity that I deserve, and all this kind of thing. And in some ways that's true. I think, probably every single filmmaker is more ready than the opportunities that they've had to date, which is why it's so important to always greenlight yourself and always make stuff within your resources that you have, whatever they are. But I think, I think just sort of in a slightly kind of Zen Buddhist way, like being okay with the fact that it takes forever, and being okay you know, with the rejection or the films that you might make along the way which don't turn out as quite as you hoped or whatever. And you know, I think the more that one can detach from immediate outcomes, or from any outcomes really, you know, and just make something for the sheer love of it, I think that is where the real important growth and, you know, creativity happens. And that's what allows you to do your life's work as a filmmaker. As you say, okay, well, right now I'm making my early work, which is, you know, all made for 50p and, you know, doesn't have the shine of whatever. Perhaps in my 50s I'll be making, you know, work that costs, you know, 80 million pounds and is a bit less good because it doesn't have the energy of youth, or, you know, or is really good because of what I learned, you know, doing the 50p stuff. But I think, you know, it's just sort of coming to a sense of peace with the fact that it takes a long time, that 99 times you hear no, but, you know, for every one time you hear yes, and no one talks about the no's, but they are there for everyone. And, you know, so it's just, you know, being okay with that, doing it for the right reasons, which is the creative love of it, making friends with people along the way, you know, being connected to your peers, and yeah, and just carrying on, because it's what you've got to do, because you've got no choice. Because if you had a choice, you would definitely stop, because it's a torturous life, you know.
Sure. Yeah, enjoy the journey is basically
Absolutely.
what
Absolutely.
you're saying.
I always believed if something can be boiled down to a cliche, then you know it's true. So enjoy the journey, man. That's my wisdom.
And it's good. It's good wisdom. I like it. I don't think anyone can argue with that. If people are interested in finding out a bit more about yourself, you're watching your work, I'm going to be posting a lot of your stuff. What's your sort of social media? You're on Twitter, aren't you? Do you want to just mention?
I'm on Twitter. Yeah, I'm such an idiot, because I set up my social media like years and years and years ago when I didn't think it was ever going to have to be something I would like say out loud. So my Twitter and my Instagram is Baronifish, which is my surname, Baron, Baron, then the letter I, and then the word fish. Why did I do that? Why, Tom? Why did I do that? That's a terrible decision made by the younger me. But case in point, at the exact age that I set up, you know, my social media, I thought I was ready to direct a feature film. I wasn't even ready to set up a social media account. So, you know, that's what I was saying. But anyway, Baronifish at Twitter and Instagram. You can find me there, probably shilling my wares like a, you know, a desperate man, and undermining everything I've said in this conversation. But yeah, that's where you'll find me, and that's where I'll be posting any apologies for anything I've said out of turn. Well, in this conversation as well, I've probably got some things wrong, but
no, not at all.
I'm approaching everything with good faith, and I'm trying.
Of course, I will put the links up so people won't have to spell it out. They can click on the link. No, Sam, I want to thank you for an amazing chat. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. It's been so lovely to meet you, and I hope that when all of this is over, that we can meet in person at some point and you know, put into practice what I've been saying in this conversation. It's great to be in touch.